Good evening, everybody. I'm not sure what's happened to Charlotte, but I hope you can all hear me. And I'm Caroline Ratner. I'm the CEO of UK Friends of Natal. And I'll just give you a bit of background about Natal. But first of all, I want you to say thank you all for coming today. And thank you, Charlotte, for inviting us, if you can hear us. Um, so Natal is Israel's leading apolitical trauma and resilience NGO, which provides immediate and long-term support to civilians affected by trauma and PTSD as a result of war and terror. And UK Friends of Natal was set up to raise awareness of its work that we do here and in Israel. For the past 28 years, Natal has been combining clinical expertise with community-based care to support individuals, families, and communities from all parts of Israel. Since October the 7th, as I'm sure you know, Israel has faced a mental health crisis of historic proportions and one that continues to grow. The trauma in Israel has been immense and ongoing, and Natal's services have never been more in demand. And since October the 7th, life has changed for Jewish people here too, and in the diaspora, both professionally and personally. And many of us experiencing a growing sense of fear and anxiety as we live with the exponential rise of anti-Jewish hate that has shaken us all. Since Heaton Park, Natal has been supporting members of the UK community, giving space for people to talk and share their experiences, including working with mental health professionals. So on that note, I'd like to welcome Professor Rivka Tuval-Mashiach, the chair of Natal Israel Trauma Resilience Center Steering Group, Vice President of Internal Affairs at Bar-Ilan University, and Professor of Psychology, who will now lead us in discussion on post-traumatic growth, exploring resilience, recovery, and growth after trauma. Thank you, and thank you, Rivka.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you for having me. I'll start by saying a few words before I share my slides with you. I think we are now more than 2.5 years into the longest war that Israel has known, and there are some lessons that we've learned about what it means to be under continuous stress, what it means to be in a rolling trauma, which I'll explain a bit later what I mean by this term. And we've learned a lot about the hidden tolls or the hidden prices of what it means to really be impacted by the things that we tend not to see, because I think as professionals we do know a lot about symptoms, we know a lot about diagnosis, we know a lot about PTSD and depression and suicidality and the things that we expect to see, but we don't speak enough, in my view, about the more subtle prices. And on the other hand, which is the main topic of this talk, we do not think about what might be some positive aspects of adjusting to the very difficult circumstances which are ongoing. And although I'm going to bring my examples from the Israeli reality, I think there are many commonalities between our situation here in Israel and your situation, or at least some of you who experience the racist and anti-Semitic attacks in your communities. So feel free to comment or ask about where we think that there are commonalities and what could we maybe imply from one situation to the other. But I hope that my discussion or my presentation will provoke some ideas that you'll find relevant to your reality. So I'll share my slides, my presentation, and I hope you can see it. I'm just okay. Oh, wait 1 second. Can you see it? Or do you see it too? Okay. So when we speak about trauma in general, it's important to note that we usually speak about a very well-defined event with a clear beginning and a clear ending. We're talking about a single event, and this event is supposed to at least potentially shatter our lives and shatter our perception of life. It can be a very serious car accident. It can be a serious illness. It can be everything that is unexpected, but also involves fear, usually the fear of losing life or witnessing the loss of life by someone else. And it's very important to note that the DSM, the ICD, the psychiatric and psychological manuals that we all use, they refer to trauma or to traumatic events as single, well-defined in terms of time events that, because they end, it's possible to speak about the post-traumatic phase of the event. When an event does not end, it's very difficult to speak about the post phase because you're still in the peri phase for a long time. But this is where we start the discussion, because we know a lot about traumatic events which are single, and we know that the majority of people will go through this type of traumatic events without carrying the price of the trauma, without, some of them will not even experience it as traumatic events. And even those who will recover without any treatment. When I speak about the majority, I speak about usually more than 85% who will not need any kind of therapy, which means that most of us, when we speak about single events, are very resilient. There is a very small portion of the population exposed who will need either medical, psychological, or psychiatric assistance in order to recover. But this is not our reality in Israel for two main reasons. One is, as I briefly mentioned, that we are in a situation that we cannot define the event to say we know exactly when it started. October 7th marked the beginning, but we have no ending to the event. And this is why we are still in a very long event, if you will, that is still happening. And there's very little literature about where do you start diagnose or identify PTSD in a situation that is not post yet. What are the prices of such a long period of stress and uncertainty and different types of exposure? So this is one aspect. And the other aspect is that the DSM does not know. DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of psychiatrists and psychologists, but the DSM does not know how to refer to collective events. It refers only to individuals. Okay, I think, if I understand correct, so the majority of people here in this talk are from the medical association. So think about your diagnostic books. We usually don't tend to diagnose communities or collectives. We diagnose individuals. But when we go to the impact, when we want to look at the impact of war, we need to adopt a much broader perspective of what we call collective trauma, national traumas when it relates to war. In your case, community trauma, because we speak about a traumatic event or traumatic reality that does not only deal with the individual. It has some clear and unique aspects of the ways it impacts the whole population, the whole community, the whole collective. And then, of course, we can start ask interesting questions. For example, if trauma happens to individuals, how can we translate its impact when we talk about communities? Can a culture be traumatized? Can a community be traumatized? Can a family be traumatized? And if it does, how can we measure symptoms of a community? How can we measure symptoms of a couple, of a family? Should we always go back to the individual level, or can we speak about symptoms or markers for trauma at the community level? So let's dive deep to the discussion before we will move, of course, to the side of the post-traumatic growth. I'll say a few words about the impact of this type of collective ongoing trauma and the prices that we see, and then we'll move to speak about resilience and PTG. So the definition for collective trauma is an event in which critical meanings related to a person's social and national identity are undermined. In extreme situations, it threatens the existence of the society or community. Now, not every traumatic event which happens to a community or a country becomes a national trauma. Okay, for example, in Israel, the COVID did not create a situation of a national trauma, although in other countries it became a collective trauma because of the number of deaths, because of the equipment that the other countries had. In Israel, it was a crisis, but it wasn't a very major one. So not every traumatic event which is collective turns out to be a real trauma. Now, this is an important slide because I think one of the ways to really think of how collective events really shatter meanings at the community level is that we start asking questions not only about ourselves and generally on the world, we start asking questions about our community and the authorities. For example, if I try to, I have many examples of our situation in Israel, because on October 7th, these were the kind of questions that Israelis asked themselves, especially in the Gaza envelope, especially in the kibbutzim, because they were feeling that they were abandoned. And this is why the attacks could have happened. But these are some of the questions that Israelis ask since then until today about the war, about the exposure to the missiles, about the ongoing threat, about having to send the sons and the daughters to a very long and dangerous, in many times, military service. Can I trust my government? Can I trust authorities to protect me? And when I'm harmed, is there anyone that I can turn to? Can I trust the institution to respond quickly? Can I trust them to be efficient? And if I cannot, what does it say about the mutual contract between me and my country? And I think, and of course, because it's a discussion, I wish to leave it to you to think about it and to reflect. But I think that with my interactions with people who cope with anti-Semitic attacks, or community leaders who cope with the very challenging and sometimes difficult reality for Jews all over the world in many countries, this is the type of questions that they ask, both about the country level and the state level, but also people start asking these questions about their community. Can I trust my community to serve as the body to which I can turn if something happens? Can I trust my community to act appropriately if something, God forbid, happens? Can I trust them that there will be a fast response? Can I trust my community to be prepared to everything that happens? Do I trust my community so that I can feel safe with my family and with my home and with my daily life? Because that's what we need when our lives are challenged or when there's a shattering. And just reading about all the events and all the microaggressions, and of course the more terrible acts that happened in the UK just in the last year, I suspect that this is a reality for many people, many Jewish people who live there. They do not even need to live in London and feel that it's in their backyard, because there's a shared reality and a shared and a mutual care and responsibility, even to people who live elsewhere, because it feels closer and it feels dangerous. So this is the kind of assumptions that might be challenged or ruptured when we are exposed to collective traumas or collective events. I'll very briefly, because I see the time, say a few words about why is this war in Israel so different than previous ones. First, as I said, we don't see the ending of it, and we do have phases. We have Iran 1, and now we had Iran 2, and we have ups and downs, where in between we almost have as normal life between these periods. But it makes it very, very complicated, because while people want to go back to normal, something happens and then everything starts all over again. So we can speak about phases of the war, but it's not an ending story. Another unique aspect is that we had multiplicity of exposures and multiplicity of triggers, because we had the hostages for more than 2 years, and everybody in Israel and outside of Israel cared for them, was afraid for them. We were all exposed to the horrible stories and the news that came from Gaza about them. We were in Israel exposed in many parts of the country to the missiles. We were exposed to the fact that most of our family members served at one time or for longer periods. Many families were evacuated. So instead of one clear exposure, exposing event or one clear trigger, we were at the same time exposed to multiplicity of events, and there were things that we didn't know how to deal with. It sounds really strange. I'm in the trauma field for more than 30 years, and this was the first war that there were cases that I had no idea how to deal with. We never had to deal with child hostages. We didn't have a protocol. The world does not have a protocol for child hostages. When they came back, we needed to invent everything. We didn't have a protocol for soldiers, young soldiers, who needed to sit with the films, the videos that the Hamas terrorists took on October 7th, and they needed to watch them in order to identify who was kidnapped, who was murdered. And just imagine, just watching over and over and over again these films and these videos is traumatizing per se. So the military turned to us to say, help us prevent them from developing PTSD. What can we do in order to prevent it? And we had no idea how we can prevent it when someone needs to see it for professional purposes. So we were really dealing with many needs. Really, the list was was very, very large. In Natal, we dealt with growing demands from as early as 6:30 in the morning, and it felt as if everything that we do is never enough because the needs were always growing and more than we could offer. Now, I'll say a few words about the tolls because one of the things, as I said at the beginning, is that there is a portion of people who would cope with PTSD, and I'll show you the numbers in a minute, but the majority look perfectly okay. The majority function well, but most of us go to work, most of us still, go to coffee places. We look as if everything is okay, but at the same time, we are burned out. We are starting to be eroded of our resources, and there are not enough opportunities for us in general, but for the first responders, for the helping professions, for therapists, for doctors. There are not enough opportunities for self-care because we are always caring for people who are suffering while we suffer at the same time. So this is why one of our psychologists, Boaz Shagi, termed the name rolling trauma, which is a bit different than ongoing or cumulative trauma, because it's a pattern in which a person begins to recover from a traumatic event. Okay, we start feeling that we regain our strength, we regain our resources, but only to be struck by a new traumatic blow before recovery is complete. This is what happens when there's a quiet time, there's a ceasefire, like now, for example, but there's uncertainty to when it's going to end. And when it ends, we're back to square one immediately. And we need to start, climbing again in this recovery process. So the cycle of disrupted recovery repeats time and again with each new trauma, collapsing the progress which was already achieved. We are very well equipped for coping when the stress is very acute and short. But when the stress is ongoing, we start losing our energy. We start feel restless. We may feel much more nervous, and it comes down to the question that I think each one of us should ask from time to time ourselves: how much battery do we have in our internal phones? How much battery do I, as a battery, have at the end of the day, at the end of the week? Do I charge myself? Do I find how to charge myself in a difficult time? Now, that's a good question for every time. This is an important question to every phase of life, especially when we work very hard. But it's much, much more crucial to ask this question during times of political uncertainty, of anti-Semitic reality, of a war, because this reality really consumes, even without us knowing, it consumes our resources. And we may feel much, much more nervous, tired, uncertain, less optimistic than we know ourselves, less energetic. This is how it really translates. And I don't need to tell this audience about homeostasis, but I'll just maybe illustrate it by saying that, we tend to strive for homeostasis, but when we feel that there is when this homeostasis is challenged, what we do is we have our ability to channel resources back in order to really rebalance ourselves. But what happens when we are, for example, on vacation, So our system doesn't need to really provoke many resources. And this is how we balance ourselves. We're quite happy. As you can see, the system is not very heavy loaded, and we are balanced quite easily. What happens under chronic stress or under an ongoing war or an ongoing situation of racism that you cannot see the end of it, or it's even in some countries escalating, is that we still, to the outside eye, we look okay because we are balanced, but we are really burdened. And the more the situation continues, the greater the risk is that we will at some point either collapse or start showing physical symptoms, not necessarily psychological, but physical symptoms of illnesses, of heart issues, will be much less focused on our way to work, etc., etc. Okay, I'm skipping a few slides just for the sake of time, and I'll just very briefly say, because it's not the main topic, that we really have evidence to show that this situation, and again, my data is from Israel, I suspect that probably there are already people in the UK, Jewish communities and Jewish environments where people start showing distress at a serious level that requires attention. And as you can see, although some of the symptoms were not representing the whole population, you could see that the feeling of fear and tension was more than it was 2/3 of the population that we sampled, and likewise irritability, hopelessness, feeling of hopelessness and helplessness, and feeling of sadness. Taking them all together, these are very high rates. Okay, it's more than half of the population, but these are normal responses. Being afraid when you have missiles all over, or when you see your neighbor's building collapsing in front of your eyes, is a normal response. Being sad is a normal response, but still, it's a burden to our emotional balance and emotional system. I'll just say briefly that we saw that even after 2 years, we still didn't go back to the baseline in our hotlines. We saw that the baseline rose, and people call even in 25, which is 2 years after the beginning of the war, in a much higher rate than it was before the war. And when we speak about PTSD, which is the most studied aspect of trauma, we see that although the rates of 30% are double the time than before October 7th, I don't have it on the slides, but we saw that even though they went back to around 18%, which is much closer to the norms in Israel, okay, not too much, not much higher than 16%. As you can see, it's around 6 times more than the global rate in the countries all over the world. So yes, there is a quite a large portion of Israelis who cope with PTSD because of the war. But there are much more broader impact to the war. We see a rise in traffic accidents. I won't go into the numbers because I want to leave some time for the post-traumatic growth. but I'm just running over the aspects. We see a rise, a very, very significant rise in violence rates, domestic violence rates during the war. And we see a rise in chronic diseases. We see almost 100% rise in increase in broken heart syndrome and 35% increase in severe heart attacks. So this is what we call the indirect costs of the war, because it wasn't like that before October 7th, but there is no direct, we do not know of a direct connection between being exposed to missiles and developing these illnesses. Now, when we speak about your communities facing persistent and ambient hostility, such as rising anti-Semitism, also we can say that the traumatic stressor is not resolved. The trigger is always there. Even if there's no one specific who now triggers it, you know, and we know that there are still people who would want to act anti-Semitic and do harm. And this is why it's very hard to come to a closure. This is why it's much more similar to what we consider the rolling trauma, because not long ago, 2 Jewish people were murdered, I think in Golders Green or near Golders Green. When the time will pass, people will start feeling as if things go to normal. But if something happens again, then all the feelings, all the sadness, all the fears, all the emotions will go back to the beginning, because the problem was not solved. And as we know, it's very difficult to solve it as it is. But it's important to say that the repercussions of this are normal responses. They are reality-based. This is not a disorder. Feeling hypervigilant or feeling sad or having grief responses, these are normal responses to an abnormal situation. I won't speak now about resilience. I might come to it at the end, or if you have questions, because I want to go to the issue of the PTG, and maybe we'll go back to the issue of resilience later if we'll have time. The reason that I included resilience in this presentation of PTG is because there is a very interesting and important debate about the question if growth is similar to resilience, and about the question of if it's not, if PTG is not similar to resilience, then in what ways is it different? So let's start with defining what it is, and then I'll say why, in my opinion, sometimes resilience is different than growing. PTG is defined as positive psychological change experienced as a result of the struggle with highly challenging life circumstances. And it happens when, during times of dealing with crisis, some people, not always and not everybody, tend toward internal reflection and mental effort, and this is why they understand what is meaningful for them. And this is why we call this growing, because there are some aspects in which we feel that we change for the good because of something bad that happened to us. It doesn't mean that we would choose to go through the difficult exposure or the difficult event, but many people, and Tedeschi and Calhoun, who really turned this term and studied it for many, many years, and Tedeschi is supervising us in Natal until this day. What they found out as clinicians was that despite the fact that people come to the clinic and share about flashbacks and very painful symptoms, they also share that difficult times in their lives and traumatic events in their lives help them to grow to become better people. And let's look at the aspects that they were able to identify. When we speak about the areas of influence or the aspects of what compose PTG, we think of five arenas. One is this of personal strength, the feeling that I went through such a difficult time that now I feel that I can survive everything. I found strength that I didn't know I have. And this is why I just feel that I'm equipped to whatever life is going to bring me. So this is one important aspect. Appreciation for life. Many people describe that they don't take anything for granted because of bad things that happen for them. They have better proportions of what is worth getting angry at and what is worth fighting for and what is not. And being able to appreciate the small and the large things in life in a way, it doesn't mean that they didn't appreciate it before, but it's a new way of really feeling gratitude. Some people describe the growth as related to a spiritual or religious or existential change. In Israel, for example, we see now, I don't know where it will take us, but we saw it in Israel after the Yom Kippur War, which was more than 50 years ago, and we start seeing it now. There is a tendency of people, it's not a huge portion, to become religious and to ask religious questions or to find religious answers to existential questions of why October 7th happened, how come that kids were kidnapped and molested and murdered. People go through this process of asking difficult questions, and some of them come out of this process with a new spiritual path. Sometimes it's a religious path, but it doesn't have to be. It might be really a decision about more spiritual life, and a process of really reflecting and exploring beliefs. The fourth aspect is this of new possibilities. And this is the sense that new opportunities may come because of the struggles, because I found out I have some capabilities that I didn't know of, or because I needed to move, like many relocated families, many evacuated families needed to find themselves and start working in new places. And this is why they decided to change where they live or to change professions. This is the reality for many, many Israeli families. So they wouldn't have chosen it in the beginning because they needed to leave their community. But now when we interview them, when we speak to them, they say, I didn't know I can do this, but the reality pushed me and I found the strength to do it. And maybe the most important thing in times of crisis is that people really felt that they were able to develop deeper relationships. They find out who their friends and support systems are, and they really, really appreciate these relationships much more than before. And there's an increased sense of connection with others, especially with those who suffer or know what I went through. So I can send you the slides if you wish later, because each one of these slides really details each of these five aspects. I just read I'll read one citation from Rabbi Harold Kushner, who lost his son from a very difficult and serious genetic illness. And he said, I'm a more sensitive person when he wrote about his sense of growth. I'm a more sensitive person, a more effective religious leader, a more sympathetic counselor because of Aaron's life and death than I would ever have been. I would give up all of these in a second if I could have my son back. If I could choose, I would forego all the spiritual growth and depth which has come my way because of our experiences and go back to being what I was 15 years ago, an average rabbi, an indifferent counselor, helping some people and unable to help others, and a father of a bright, happy boy. But I cannot choose. Okay, so I think this is a very powerful paragraph, and it really resonates with what people say about not choosing this change and not choosing this growth over the trauma that they needed to go through. Everyone said I would prefer 100% to not know what I needed to learn. But this is how they came from the other side, with wisdom, with appreciation of life, with much more sensitivity, a positive sensitivity, with a better sense of proportion, with a much, much stronger sense of connectedness and belonging to one's community. And I want to say, before I'll end it and open the floor for questions or comments, I want to say that what we've learned now is a new thing, which we now study and we start really theorize about it. And that is that communities can develop growth together in a way that changes the community for the better, which means that, like individuals, if communities go through a crisis in a good way because they are together, because they are prepared, because they can find the ways to grieve together, because they can find the ways to support each other, so they can grow and become better communities. And just to show you what, for example, I mean by this, the community succeeds in prioritizing healing processes. It makes room for ceremonies and for listening to survivors' stories and for validating survivors. And the community becomes much more creative in finding solutions. And we see it in some, not all, but we do see it because, as you know, the October 7th massacre happened in kibbutzim and in small towns. We have ways to compare because some of these kibbutzim and some of these communities, they do much, much better than others. And of course, it relates to the past, it relates to the prior resources, it relates to many, many aspects. But it's very clear that some of these communities become stronger after October 7th, not weaker. And some others become weaker. So as you see, I have many, many more slides that I can share, but I'll stop here. And I'll just open the floor for comments, for questions, because of the sake of time.
Thank you so much, Rivka. So that was fantastic. I'm sorry, some of the practices in Barnett's internet suddenly went down just as I was speaking, so I missed the right at the beginning, and apologies that the introduction was a bit fragmented. We've got a couple of questions that already have been asked. I'll open it for people. I don't know, Andrew, if I unmute you, if you want to ask your question.
It's okay if people want to ask, yeah.
Andrew, do you want to come in and ask your question? Okay, otherwise I can read it. So he said, can you comment on the differences between generations and whether young in Israel are different to those in the UK, for example?
Wow, it's a very, very good question. I can say that in general, the younger do much better than the older ones in Israel, and this is somewhat similar to the findings all over the world. Younger people are less burned out, they have more resources, they are much more optimistic. So I assume that the younger generation in Israel is somewhat similar to the younger generation in the UK. I would say, however, that I think, and this relates to the resilience aspect that I didn't really dealt with, I do tend to think that the Israelis, the Israeli kids and the Israeli teenagers are more resilient because they were exposed in the past. And prior exposure, not always, but sometimes it really makes you more resilient, especially if you were supported and if you had a good environment. What I'm not a prophet, but what I do think is that for you in the UK, I think that with a strong sense of community and with a strong sense of leadership and with clarity and transparency, I think the teenagers will develop this resilience because it will become something that is part of their reality and hopefully not for long. But as long as this happens, they will know how to identify it. They will know what to do. They will know which phone they have to call. They will be equipped as Israeli kids now know what to do in case of emergency. And Israeli kids know what to do. Okay, so maybe there is a gap, but I think this is why communities are so important in this regard.
Thank you, Rivka. We've got another couple of questions. You referenced that people often become more religious as one of the responses in the terms of the post-traumatic growth. Suzanne's asked a question. So she said, after the world wars, many people stopped believing in God at all. Are you seeing this now?
We don't see it yet, but this is definitely it can I would include it in as part of the same process. I don't think that it has to be only one direction. People can start deciding to be more religious or to be less religious because they have questions and because of the answers that they find to this question. Being circular is part of what we view as PTG, but the short answer is that we don't see it to a large extent in Israel yet.
Thank you, Sharon. We've got somebody, Arif, who's joined us from India. So welcome to Arif. And he's actually written, how can doctors show solidarity with you all and help with your spiritual knowledge from India? And he's given his email. So we will forward that on. So it's really nice to have that message, Arif, coming not just from the clinicians across the Jewish, but wider clinicians across England. That's come from India. So I can pass that on. There was a message before from Claire saying it was when you were talking at the beginning about complex trauma and wondering whether actually when you were talking about PTSD at the beginning, whether part of that was similar to complex trauma.
This is a very important question too. So thank you for this, Claire. It's not similar to complex trauma because complex trauma is usually without breaks. Okay, you live with an abusive father in the house. He's there with you. So there are small breaks when he's not at home or when he's sleeping, but there's a constant risk. We are in a reality where sometimes you'll come to Israel, you won't believe the beaches are full, coffee places are full. You'll think as if you're in Switzerland. I mean, the weather is nice here, but it's like a crazy situation because in a minute people run to the shelter, but when the siren ends, they go back to the coffee places. This is why it's called rolling trauma. This is why it's called ongoing threat. It's not ongoing trauma, okay? complex trauma is maybe the next step. And sometimes, if God forbid this war will continue for many, many years, it may turn into complex trauma. But we are not there. And there are some differences between these two definitions.
Thank you, Rivka. I'll open it if anyone wants to put their hands up and ask any other questions, because we haven't got any others that have been written into the Q&A. So does anyone want any hands that will go up, we can bring you in? I'm not seeing any at the moment. Rivka, I don't know. We have got another 5 minutes. So there is another English Jewish webinar that's happening straight after this. So I don't know if you want to say anything for another few minutes, but I just maybe share that I was really struck when I heard from a friend of mine who'd been in Israel last summer and had heard that concept of post-traumatic growth that I'd never heard of before. And it all felt, we all know how difficult it is, and we know about that. It feels like a roller coaster, what everyone's going through there, and reflected in World Jewry. And it's really lovely to hear that we know there's ongoing trauma and ongoing difficulty and challenges, but it's really nice to hear this other aspect, where actually some individuals and some communities are growing. So it's a really lovely other aspect to see something positive coming out, and where you refer to the sort of growth post after the Yom Kippur War. Some people remember that, some people, many of us don't. We were too young then, but actually just hearing this developing now is phenomenal. Claire, we've got a hand. Do you want to come in with a question?
Sure.
I need to unmute you. Claire, you're unmuted. Do you want to come in?
Thanks very much. Yeah, so the situation is obviously very different in England for Jews here to in Israel. But that said, in Israel, the community is the whole country, or at least quite a lot of it, whereas in England, Anglo-Jewry is an extreme minority, and individuals are not necessarily within a particular community or strong community. How can we learn and get better affiliations with Israel to learn how to deal with our trauma?
Wow, that's such an important comment. First, I want to say that I think we need to really cultivate online communities, even if we're not part of a geographical community. And I think Israel in this regard should definitely be one of these communities, because unfortunately, I mean, we've gained so much knowledge about trauma and about how to treat trauma. So at least this we can offer. But I think just living in the UK and being part of a larger community, even if it's online, this is an important thing, because some of the experiences are really unique to you. We are not, as you say, a minority. When we walk in the world, we walk as proud Israelis because we know that we are the majority. It really feels different than being a minority. And I didn't have time this talk to speak about moral injury, but I think part of what you may experience as a minority is really that your country betray you when they do not really protect you as they should. And when there are, I'm not saying it definitely about the UK, but I hear it from other countries that Jewish residents and citizens feel that the country does not do what it needs to do in order to protect Jewish lives. And this is part of what creates moral injury, because we have expectations from our country, and it's like a contract. We pay taxes, we're good citizens, we should be protected. So, but this is a whole new topic that I don't have time to really talk about now. The very short answer is that I think, I don't know if Sharon is here, but I think Natal would be happy to really help through through the UK Friends with whatever we can, whether it's more workshops, sending materials, whatever you feel is needed. but also there are great websites that the Joint and the Jewish Agency created for Jews all over the world. And I think it's easier to be affiliated with everything that we have to offer through these online mediums.
Thank you so much, Rivka. We've got one more question that I'm going to ask very quickly. It's from Sarah about toxic resilience, which is something she's heard about. Is that something that you've heard about, the need to appear resilient and not checking on your battery? Is that something you're coming across?
Yeah, and yeah, and Israelis, sometimes we have this facade of being always on the good side. And it relates to something that I didn't mention, which is called elusive post-traumatic growth, when people want to feel that they grow, but they do not necessarily grow. Like, for example, someone says, I feel that I become much closer to my friends, and his wife attests that he doesn't meet any new friends at all. So it's a psychological need to feel that we are resilient and to feel that we have grown. The research shows that not always it really translates into something that people can see in the outside. But yes, I think resilience can cost us too. And then it can become toxic. And of course, I think the most important thing is really to remember to check on our batteries and respond adequately.
Really, thank you so much, Rivka. So I know it's 9:30 for you. It's 7:30 for us.
Yes.
So I'm going to bring this to a close. And just as I was saying, one of the things you were referencing was online communities to help support people. And that's what the JMA tries to do. And we have some events in person and some online. Hopefully you've all received, there's next month, we're going to have a webinar on the 11th of June, Save a Child's Heart, from 3 countries, from Israel, from Zambia, and someone from the UK talking. But we're also looking at other things we can do, and you've suggested something in terms of Rivka, and Sharon's reached out. There are things we're going to look at and see what's the ongoing support that we can give beyond the webinars and beyond some of the formal events that we have, to see what really fits, what really that we can do to be that is helpful in this context. So I want to thank everyone. I also want to thank Sharon, who's our new admin for JMA, for having arranged this. Also, I can see David in the attendees. So thank you to David, because this community of JMA has been started by him, and he's given decades of his time to supporting Jewish clinicians across the UK. It's been fantastic, Rivka. We're going to share the slides with everybody. And in the chat, some of the people have said that they would be interested in hearing more. So we'll have a discussion and see perhaps it's something we can revisit at a point in time. But let's hope that we carry on with the post-traumatic growth. Let's hope that that roller coaster doesn't go backwards. We don't actually, you don't have more trauma headed your way in the near future. And really, really grateful for your for you joining us. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. And thanks to everyone for joining.